Hi there, my name is Abu and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial, I will show you how to create a React web application where a user can scroll to specific sections of your website. For example, on this website, I have the services section, a blog section, and the contact section. I could use the mouse scroll to go down to the different sections, but in this tutorial, I will show you how to scroll to a specific section of your website. So if a user wants to navigate to the services section, they can click on it and they go to services section. And the bottom right, you can see there's a back to top button, and I can go to the blog section and I can scroll back to the top, or I can go to the contact section and I can scroll back to the top. So I hope you like this tutorial and you can use it on your next application. So without wasting any time, let's jump in and get started. So this is a fresh new application that I created using npx create react app, and I gave it a name, so you can do the same. So now I'm just gonna start this application. So npm start. So while the development server is starting, I can come back to my application, and the first thing we're gonna do is we are going to create a simple navigation menu. So from this app.js component, so we don't need any of this from the header all the way down. We're gonna delete all of that. If we look at our application, we want to create a simple header with the services, blog, and contact navigation links. So back to our application, the first thing we're going to do is we shall create a simple div here. And this div is the one that's going to hold the navigation menu. So in this div, we're just going to say unordered list. And in this unordered list, we have the list items. So the first one is going to be services. And I can copy this down. So Shift, Alt, and the down arrow, copy it 2 times. And I have the blog. And finally, I have the contact. You can call this anything you want. You don't need to copy exactly what I'm doing here. You can call it anything you want. So if I save this and I check my application, I should see services, blog, and contact. But we want this to appear in a way that it's going to be in line. So this is vertically downward and it has some decoration. So we don't want this text decoration. We just want it to be inline. So we're going to have to add some CSS onto these link items. Straight away, we can give it a class name, and I'll call my class names link. And to save time, I'll just copy this and paste it 3 times down here on the blog and on the contacts. And I'll save that. And now in my app.css, I don't need any of this. At least I want my text to remain centered. So I'll leave the top class and I'll just remove from app logo all the way to the bottom. I don't need that. So straight away, I can start designing for my link. So I'll have my class of link, and I don't want any text decoration. So text decoration, none. And I also want to display it inline. So display, and I want some padding, and I'll also want to give it some font weight. So font size, and finally the cursor. I can look at my application. So as you can see, it's now inline and there's some space between the text and it's a little bit bigger and the font weight has increased a little bit, and my cursor changes to a pointer when I hover over any of the links, and this is the behavior that I want. And now since I have this already working, and now I need to give this some height, I'll give this a class name, and since this is what is containing my hero of the website, I'll give it a class name of hero, and I save this. So back to my CSS, hero, I'm just going to give this a height of about 600 pixels, and maybe give it a color. So that's the color that I'm using for the first section. And the next part is to design the next section of the website. And this is going to be the services section. So I'll just create another div here, And in this div, I'll give it a class name and I'll call this services. And in this div, I'll have an h3 and I'll just call this services. To save time, I'll just make copies of this 2 more times. Since I can change this. This is the first part, services. So I'll call this blog. And the last one, this is going to be contact. Back to my application, I should see down here services, blog, and contact. But just as the hero section, I want to give it a small styling, a color in the background, and then I'll give it a height. Back to my CSS, again, just to save time, I'll copy this 2 more times. You can use any colors you want. In this case, it's perfectly fine. So I'll call this contact. And when I save this and I check out my application, I should see services with the color, blog with the color, and contact with a color of its own. Now that we are done with the design, so we need to start making these clicks work. So how exactly do we do this? We use a React hook called useRef. So this React hook sort of stores a reference of a certain section or a certain location of your website. So from the top, I will just import useRef, and then up here, I have to initialize the useRef hook. So for the different section, I will say const, I have my services section. So this is equal to useRef, and this useRef expects an initial value. So for this case, I'll just give it null. I will copy this 2 more times, and I'll just rename this to blog. And finally, I'll rename this to contact. So how exactly are we going to use this useRef hook? So this is where we're going to use the full power of JavaScript. So in JavaScript, remember we have the window element. If I say it here, I'll initialize a method here, scroll to section. So this is taking an argument, element ref as the argument, and I'll use the arrow function. So I can use the window method dot. It has so many you can use, but I want to use the scroll, and not just the scroll, but scroll to a specific section of the window. That is a method that we initialize, and we want to scroll to the top of that specific section. But then the top of this specific section, we are going to use the reference that is going to be sent when we click the specific link. Element reference, remember this is the argument that we are sending to this method, dot current, which is the current location where it is, and dot offset top. This offset top means that specific reference is going to be held at the top of that window. So it has another element here called behavior, and this behavior, we're gonna make it smooth so that the scrolling is going to be as smooth as possible. For example, if I click, it's just very smooth. This is what is going to control how it's scrolling to that specific section. And now on the link items is where we are going to call this method. So on click, we have a callback function. So this callback function is going to call the scroll to section. So I'll just copy this, paste it there. And this is expecting an argument. And what argument are we going to pass to this method on the services section? Surprise, surprise, surprise. The argument is up here, the one that we created from the useRef. So I'll just copy this and paste it into this method. So when I save this, meaning that when I click on this link services, this method is going to be called and it's going to execute this method up here. So I'll do the same for the rest of the links, but I have to change this. Remember, we have the blog and we also have the contact. So let's save this and test our application. Click on services. Nothing is happening here. Let's just go back to our code and see what we have done wrong. So I see that we have all of this set up, but then we are not having the references on these sections, or rather on these divs of the sections of the website. So we have to pass a reference to that section. So there's a prop called ref. As you must have guessed, it's short for reference. So we pass here services, and I won't waste your time. I'll copy the same prop to blog and the same prop to contact. So blog and finally contact. Back to my application, and what do you know? it's working perfectly. I can click on blog, it takes me to the blog section. And when I click on contact, I go to the contact section. Perfect. This is very, very easy and very simple. And it's really amazing to use this. So we have this all working. So the next thing you're going to do is to add the back to top button. And the back to top button, you'll also find it's very easy to implement. This back to top button, it's easier to create it as a different component. We can also create it up here, but like I always say in all my tutorials, I want to try as much to teach you how to write clean code. We don't want to have everything in one module and then we end up disorganizing the module. It will be very ugly and it's going to be very, very hard for you to debug your code. Onto the files, and I'm going to create a folder here called components, and in the components folder I'll create a new module .js and RAFCE React Arrow Function Export Component. We have an extension that is doing this. If you don't know about this extension, please watch my introduction to React video and how to set up your VS Code for React. So we need two hooks to implement this scroll to top button. One of the hooks is the use state, obviously, because we are going to handle the true and the false bit of the button. Obviously, if you scroll down to a specific length or a specific section of your website, that's when you want to switch it to true so that the button appears. Or when you go back up to a specific section, you can change it to false so the button does not appear. And then we want to use the use effect. The use effect simply is going to be running every time the component loads, and that is the effect that we want. So on the top, first we are going to import use state from React, and we shall also import use effect. And as you must have guessed, we need to create a constant here. So I'm gonna call it show scroll top button, and then set show scroll top button. And then this is coming from use state, and I'll initialize it to false. And the next thing we're going to do is the use effect. So use effect, and this takes a callback function, and we're going to do two things. So if, again, we're going to use the window.scrollY. So we're going to check how much the user has scrolled in the Y axis. So scroll Y, if it's greater than 300 pixels, what do? We want to set show scroll button to true, and otherwise else we're going to set show scroll button to false. It's that simple. And then we're going to control this use effect. Obviously, we shall just put an empty array there, but this will not work yet because we have handled the true and the false of the button, but we haven't yet used that specific button to show it at a specific part where we want. So before going further, just as we did in app.js, we want to use the window and scroll to top here. So we're going to put here the top to be 0, and actually we can copy all of this. We don't need to write this code again. So copy this before the return statement, paste it up there. We can give this another name, scroll top, and this doesn't take any arguments this time, and we are just going to make this 0. So there's no distance from the top, it's just going to be 0. So the button we are going to use here for scrolling back to the top, we shall use an icon, and this icon we shall find it from React Icons. So first thing, I'm going to install React Icons. So I'll just copy this and back to my application. I'll open up the terminal and I'll stop this and I'll just paste it here, install React Icons, and I'll run my server again. And while the server is running, so I will import an icon, and I want an icon called angle up. So I can have this double angle up. This is the one that I like. So this is the name that I'm going to take, and back to my application, paste it here. And this is coming from React Icons, and it's coming from Font Awesome. So all the way to the bottom, now this is where we want to show that icon, and I want to bring in the Font Awesome double up angle, but we need two things here. So we need on click. So when the user clicks on this button, we call the method scroll top, this method right here. What do we see? We don't see anything yet after 300 pixels of scrolling. Why is that? Well, first of all, we need to change the behavior of this button. We only want this button to appear when show scroll button is true. So how do we do this? We're going to use the AND operator. If show scroll button is true, and show this, and this button will appear. And all of this, we're going to put them in a div. So this is what we want, and because it's logic, we have to put them in curly braces. So when you look at our application and scroll down, there's still nothing is happening. The reason why it's not appearing yet is because we haven't set its location, and we have to go back to CSS and then try to set up where we want this button to appear. So back to app.css, I can come all the way down. So we can get started with the position of this button. .top btn position. Where do we want this to appear? So first of all, we want this position to be fixed. The distance from the bottom is 15 pixels and the position from the right is 20 pixels. And now I'm gonna come back to this module and then add here a class name, and I'm just gonna call this class name top btn position. So just copy that and paste it there. So save this. Shall we see anything? No, not yet. So we need to add some styling also to this button. So back to app.css .top btn style. I have a few styles. Again, you can change this to whatever you want. So the first one I have is I want to change the height. And if we're changing the height, that means we also have to change the width and the radius. But at the same time, I want to change the border and the background color for this button. And another style that I want, the color of the icon itself. And the last one, I want the cursor. When someone hovers over this, I want the cursor to be a pointer. So let me save this back to the application. Will I see it now? No, not yet. We are not seeing this because we have created this design, but it's just hanging there. It's not being applied anywhere in our code. We have to go back to our top level module, which is app.js, and we import this button from here. So import scroll to top from components and from scroll to top, and I will just call it inside this div over here. So scroll to top and self closing tag. So save this and back to my application. When I scroll down, I still don't see it. So the reason why this is not appearing yet is, if you must have realized, we used the window here, but we didn't add an event listener. Window.add event listener, and this event listener that we're going to add is going to be scroll, and this takes a callback function here, and this callback function is what is going to handle this if statement. So it's going to check where the user is. So paste it there and save it. So back to the application, and what do you know, we can see the button right there. So we needed to add the event listener. And also, just maybe if you want to add something here, maybe you want to change the hover style of this button. So when the user hovers over this button, it stays the same. Maybe we can just make it reverse everything that you see there. So back to the CSS, we can just say top btn style.hover. So when the user hovers over this button, we don't want any animation, and we want to change the background, just the reverse, and we're going to have the color of the icon itself and the border. So let's test out our application. When we hover over this now, you can see a small effect on the button, which adds a better experience when the user is using it. So this button now is just being used for scrolling to the top, but you can also add here maybe a WhatsApp icon, then someone can directly contact you, or email. So this button down here can be used for so many things depending on what you want for your website. So with that, we come to the end of this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it and you can use this in your next projects. Stay hungry and stay foolish. See you on the next tutorial.